The raging fire consumed Emily's vision. She never imagined that after dedicating so many years to the Michael family, she would end up with such a tragic fate. As the intense pain surged through her, she screamed her resentment and hatred at the tightly closed door.
Michael! In the next life, I will make you pay!
The thick smoke robbed Emily of her last breath. She felt her consciousness and soul descending into an endless abyss. Flashes of memories flickered through her mind. With a splash, Emily struggled in the bathtub, gasping for air as she emerged from the water. She looked down in a panic, seeing her porcelain white skin.
The sensation is so real. Have I been reborn?
She stood up in a daze and walked to the mirror. The face that stared back at her was that of a young girl, not the wrinkled woman she remembered. Emily's eyes were filled with disbelief.
How could this be?
Before she could fully process it, a familiar voice sounded outside the bathroom door.
Are you done? Everyone is still waiting downstairs. Emily? Emily?
Michael called out a few more times but received no response. Just as he was about to push the door open, Emily quickly locked it.
I'll be out soon. You go ahead.
The person outside hesitated for a couple of seconds, then replied.
All right.
His footsteps faded away. Emily put on a bathrobe and stepped out. She was shocked to realize that this was the night of her wedding 10 years ago.
Ha ha ha! Michael! You never expected this, did you? Even the heavens couldn't stand it. In this life, I will personally deal with you.
When Emily finally finished dressing and walked gracefully towards her husband, the elders of both families had already left, leaving only the younger generation and a drunken Michael. It was only when someone nervously reminded him that Michael noticed his new bride behind him. He staggered towards Emily, reeking of alcohol.
Darling.
The strong smell of alcohol made Emily feel nauseous, but she forced herself to support Michael.
If you're drunk, go rest upstairs. Don't make a scene later.
Emily's sharp words made Michael pause. He looked at her with a hint of suspicion. Had the always obedient Emily suddenly changed?
What's wrong with you? What day is it today? Why are you embarrassing me in front of everyone?
Michael's face darkened, revealing his true nature.
If you can't stand it, then let's get a divorce.
Emily responded coldly, her fists clenched tightly around her dress as she struggled to control the surge of hatred within her. Her words seemed to snap Michael out of his daze. He frowned and calmed down, his expression softening.
Emily, I'm sorry. I drank too much and upset you. Please don't be angry.
His gentle words were almost identical to the man she remembered. She steadied herself, allowing Michael to pull her into his arms, pretending to be tired.
I have a headache. I want to go to our room and rest.
All right, you go rest. I'll join you after the banquet.
Michael patted her shoulder, releasing a faint white powder, his eyes full of calculation. A strange scent filled the air, making Emily feel uneasy. She had no choice but to play along with Michael's plan. As they exchanged seemingly affectionate farewells, they didn't notice a pair of intense eyes watching from the corner. Emily went upstairs with a heavy heart, trying to figure out how to avoid the wedding night. Suddenly, she paused, feeling a burning sensation in her chest, an unbearable heat building up.
Damn it! I have fallen into Michael's trap.
Forcing her trembling legs to carry her to the second floor, Emily was suddenly dragged into a dark corner by a strong hand.
MMM.
What's wrong with you?
Before she could answer, Emily's consciousness was consumed by a haze of desire. Daniel noticed something was off with the woman in front of him and frowned, catching her as she nearly collapsed.
Help me.
She pointed weakly towards the guest room at the end of the hall.
All right, hold on.
Daniel's face hardened as he scooped Emily up in his arms. Lying in the cold bathtub, Emily's clothes were soaked with sweat. The icy water provided a brief respite, but the desire only grew stronger.
Please, help me.
The bathroom was filled with a strong scent of hormones. Emily's soft body pressed against Daniel, her red lips landing on his neck with a deadly allure.
Do you know what you're doing?
Suppressing his own rising desire, Daniel pushed Emily away, his hand touching her burning forehead. She slowly pulled his hand down from her forehead, her pink tongue licking his fingertips. The thread of rationality in Daniel's mind snapped. He could no longer suppress his inner longing, lowering his head to fiercely taste the sweetness of the woman in his arms. Like dry wood catching fire, it was an instant ignition. When the morning sunlight streamed through the window, Daniel was still asleep. It wasn't until the maid knocked on the door that he abruptly opened his eyes. The cold spot beside him reminded him that the person who had been there was long gone. Daniel pulled back the covers, his gaze immediately drawn to a stark red stain on the sheets.
Emily.
He murmured her name softly, a deep ripple forming in his heart. Meanwhile, the person in his thoughts stood with a serious expression in front of her husband, silently enduring his anger.
Do you know I searched for you all night?
Michael's face was livid as he questioned Emily about her whereabouts. The fact that his wife had gone missing on their wedding night was a blow to his pride. More importantly, in her condition last night. The thought made his anxiety grow, but he restrained himself from acting rashly. Emily adjusted the collar of her shirt, calmly responding to his questioning.
I wasn't feeling well last night and fell asleep in the guest room.
Ignoring whether Michael believed her or not, she held her head as if in pain and walked towards the bathroom. Just as she turned, Michael grabbed her arm. In the struggle, Michael's gaze fell on the faint marks on her collarbone. A sinister look flashed in his eyes. He slowly released her hand and spoke gloomily.
All right, if you're not feeling well, rest up. I'll go to the office and we'll go home together in the afternoon.
Emily watched his back, her eyes shooting a sharp look. Home? Ha, that place was never her home. She wandered downstairs, the familiar living room from her memories making her feel disoriented, as if she were back in that fierce fire. Although it was afternoon, Michael didn't return from the company until evening. The luxurious estate of the Michael family slowly came into view, the dim lights lining the path.
Second young master, second young madam.
The butler respectfully opened the car door for them.
Mom, Dad, Grandma.
Emily greeted them calmly, her eyes deep as she looked at the familiar scene from her past life. As expected, the next words from Laura were,
"What time do you think it is? How can the daughter-in-law of the Michael family be so disrespectful? What will people think?"
The elegantly dressed middle-aged woman cast a sidelong glance, trying to appear sophisticated but failing due to her inherent crudeness.
She smiled apologetically, about to speak when Michael interrupted.
Mom, I was held up at the company. It's not Emily's fault.
He led Emily to the dining table, smiling at Laura.
I don't know what could be so important for a mere department manager.
With a bang, Robert slapped the table, his voice tinged with anger.
On such a joyous day, must you be so unpleasant? Grace, stop being so sarcastic.
The Michael family had 2 brothers. Only the eldest, John, was the child of the first wife, while David was the product of Robert's second marriage. The original heir, James, had been paralyzed in a car accident 2 years ago, becoming Robert's greatest sorrow. The ambitious behavior of David and his mother only fueled Robert's anger. As the atmosphere calmed and everyone began to eat, the butler announced,
The young master is here.
The man who entered was tall and handsome, his refined features instantly captivating.
Aunt, uncle.
He smiled, a perfect curve forming at the corner of his mouth. When his gaze met Emily's flushed face, his smile took on a mysterious meaning. Michael and his mother, who were not acknowledged, felt awkward but said nothing. Emily noticed Michael's hand clenched into a fist under the table. Some enjoyed the meal, while others found it tasteless. Afterward, Robert called Michael to the study. With nothing else to do, Emily wandered around the estate. Lost in thought, she suddenly heard light footsteps behind her. Emily became alert, but before she could turn, she was enveloped in a warm embrace, stumbling backward. Protected by the soft grass and the man's strong arms, Emily felt only slight dizziness. When she saw the man's face, her body stiffened.
So, you're Michael's cousin?
Yes, otherwise how could I share such an unforgettable night with my sister-in-law? Here's my number, you can contact me if you need anything, even about last night.
Shut up!
Emily's sharp voice cut him off, her face red as she covered Daniel's mouth, looking around nervously. The next moment, the wet sensation on her palm made her jerk her hand away as if electrocuted. She steadied herself, feeling frustrated by her reaction. Everything was unfolding as she remembered, except for Daniel, who was an unexpected variable. In her past life, she had little interaction with this cousin, knowing only that he was still unmarried in his 30s.
Please forget about last night. It was just an accident. I don't want any secret relationship with you.
Her urgent words were like a bucket of cold water poured over Daniel. Emily went upstairs with a heavy heart, trying to figure out how to avoid the wedding night. Suddenly, she paused, feeling a burning sensation in her chest, an unbearable heat building up.
Damn it! I've fallen into Michael's trap.
Daniel's passionate kisses trailed down Emily's slender neck, his murmurs barely audible between breaths.
Emily, do you really not remember me?
His hoarse voice carried not just desire but also a hint of grievance and sorrow. With a loud smack, the intimate atmosphere was abruptly shattered. Daniel turned his head, his eyes full of hurt, listening to Emily's heavy breathing, his entire being exuding a cold aura.
What are you doing, Daniel?
Seizing the opportunity, Emily used all her strength to push the man off her, quickly standing up and fleeing.
What was she supposed to remember? Why did he say that?
Michael's distant call didn't give her much time to think. Emily's face hardened as she walked towards the main hall. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Daniel cursed under his breath, the sound of a wheelchair creaking behind him.
What's got the mighty CEO Daniel looking so disheveled?
James noticed the red mark on Daniel's face, a smirk playing on his lips. He couldn't help but think of Emily's face, a bitter smile gradually forming.
Tell me, what should I do? I still don't understand how my little sweetheart became someone else's wife.
The sorrow on Daniel's face seemed out of place, yet so real. James frowned, finally sighing.
There are many things in this world that we are powerless to change.
The cool breeze gradually calmed Daniel's turbulent thoughts. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were deep and unreadable.
Michael seems to be making his move. Be careful during this time.
He advised his friend, his gaze drifting towards the bright lights of the main hall. This scheming cousin of his was definitely not a small problem. Back at home,
Emily, come down for dinner.
Michael gently knocked on the door, calling out to the person inside. A low response came from within, and the door opened to reveal Emily's calm face. Michael smiled, taking Emily's hand despite her slight resistance, leading her downstairs. The dining table was already set with fragrant dishes, but Emily had no appetite. Everything felt like the calm before the storm, her heart filled with unease, her hand holding the chopsticks trembling.
What's wrong?
As soon as he spoke, Emily recoiled as if something disgusting had touched her shoulder. Her hand slipped, and the porcelain bowl crashed to the floor, rice scattering everywhere. Michael's hand froze in midair, his gaze towards Emily dark and menacing.
Emily.
He called her name coldly.
Don't test my patience.
His voice was filled with cruelty, as if he would tear her apart the next second. Emily's heart tightened, her hand bleeding from the sharp fragments as she cleaned up without reacting. Meanwhile, Michael continued eating his lunch as if nothing had happened, his grip on the chopsticks terrifyingly strong.
Accompany me to an event tonight.
I don't want to go.
With a loud bang, Michael slammed the table. Before she could see his face clearly, he had pushed her to the ground. Michael straddled her, his hands gripping her neck tightly.
Don't mistake my tolerance for your freedom. It would be easy for me to deal with those two old folks from your family. You better know your place.
The man, like a venomous snake, tightened his grip on Emily's neck. Emily's face turned red, and just as she was about to lose consciousness, Michael suddenly released her and stood up. The return of oxygen to her lungs felt dry and harsh, causing Emily to cough violently. For a moment, she thought she was going to pass out again. Michael's premature outburst deepened Emily's hatred. That night, in the luxurious hotel suite, several seats at the dining table remained empty. As the door opened, a portly middle-aged man entered, flanked by a few obsequious followers.
Ha ha ha, Michael, you've really gone all out.
The greasy laughter was as repulsive as the layers of fat on his body. Without looking up, Emily knew it was Henry, one of the shareholders of the company.
Mr. Henry, you're too kind. This is nothing, just a small token of appreciation for your support at work.
As he spoke, he picked up a glass bottle from the table, filled a glass with wine, and handed it to Emily.
Go, offer Mr. Henry a drink.
Emily's face was full of reluctance, her grip on the glass so tight it nearly shattered. If she could, she would have thrown the liquid in Michael's face. But the warning in Michael's eyes forced her to take a step forward.
Michael, you're a lucky man. Your wife is stunning.
Henry's satisfaction was evident, even changing his address from Michael to Mr. Michael. Michael's face lit up with joy, his sycophantic nature on full display, lacking any semblance of a dignified air. After several rounds of drinks, Emily was quite inebriated. Just as her consciousness began to fade, she heard Michael's distant voice, and her face turned pale.
Then it's settled. Thank you, Mr. Henry. Emily, take Mr. Henry upstairs to rest.
Emily couldn't believe her ears as she turned to look at Michael's calm expression, her fear magnified to the extreme.
We just got married. How could he?
She thought that no matter how malicious Michael was, he wouldn't do something so vile. If it got out, how could the family tolerate him? Terrified, she stood up abruptly, trying to escape. Her foggy mind cleared instantly, but she froze when she saw Michael's lips move. He mouthed Emily's parents, then made a slicing motion across his neck, the meaning clear.
I need to use the restroom.
Without waiting for a response, Emily fled. She ran to a bathroom stall and immediately called Daniel. But there was no answer, the busy tone in her ear making her vision blur. By the time Michael, with a dark expression, kicked open the bathroom doors one by one, Emily still hadn't reached Daniel. When she opened her eyes again, she was in the hotel suite, the bright lights stinging her eyes. Emily blinked, the pain in her neck making her gasp. The sound of running water came from the bathroom, and outside the door, there was complete silence. Emily tiptoed to the door, trying to open it. As light streamed through the crack, hope flared in her eyes.
Mr. Michael instructed that you leave tomorrow morning.
The voices of the two bodyguards in black suits shattered Emily's last hope. The door closed again, and Emily sat back on the bed in despair, reaching for her phone in her pocket, only to remember that it had been taken away before Michael knocked her out. Her gaze fell on the glass on the bedside table, a determined look in her eyes. When Henry came out of the bathroom humming a tune, Emily had only half undressed. She knelt on the bed, her long legs shifting to face Henry, her finger beckoning seductively, making the middle-aged man's soul almost leave his body.
You little temptress. Michael has trained you well.
He approached the bed with a wicked smile, his chest and belly fat jiggling with each step, arms outstretched like a hungry wolf. Emily dodged to the side, not letting him touch even a strand of her hair, her smile deepening.
Is that all you've got, Mr. Henry?
No man, regardless of age, would back down from such a challenge, especially not in front of someone as enticing as Emily. He adjusted the towel covering his lower body, launching himself again like a massive meteor.
Watch how I handle you, you little vixen.
Henry sighed in pleasure at the feel of her smooth skin under his palm, but before his eager lips could land, a cold, sharp sensation at his neck made him freeze.
Now, who's handling whom?
Emily pushed the triangular glass shard a centimeter closer, making the disgusting old man turn pale, his hands quickly releasing her. Emily smiled coldly, pulling her clothes back on with one hand, her eyes filled with a desperate courage.
If you don't want to lose your ability to speak, be a good hostage.
The faint scent of blood had a significant effect, and Henry quickly agreed, allowing Emily to lead him to the door. The people outside, hearing the commotion, were on high alert but were stunned by the scene inside. They couldn't believe how quickly the situation had turned.
Step aside, all of you.
Under Henry's urgent orders, the bodyguards stepped aside, watching as the two reached the elevator. Emily kicked off her high heels, knowing that the moment the elevator doors opened would be her best chance to escape. With a ding, the elevator doors opened a crack, and Emily's heart raced with excitement. But in the next second, the hallway lights went out. The elevator doors stopped halfway, and in the darkness, chaos ensued. Emily, still reeling from the shock, felt Henry slip from her grasp.
You ungrateful woman.
Emily's head buzzed from the blow, her blurred vision filled with the approaching figures of several men.
Get away from me. Don't touch me.
She cried out in despair, prying at the elevator doors with her hands, unaware that the glass shard had cut her palm. As the men reached for her, Emily, backed against the elevator door, closed her eyes and swung her arms wildly. Screams filled the air, but Emily heard nothing. Suddenly, hot liquid splattered onto Emily's face, followed by a heavy thud. The pitch-black corridor was filled with an ominous atmosphere. Michael's bodyguards were nowhere to be seen, leaving the empty hallway echoing with Emily's desperate sobs. The overhead light flickered twice before coming back on, blinding Emily momentarily. She gasped for breath, slowly adjusting to the light. Lowering her arm, the horrifying scene came into view.
Henry.
Henry lay on the floor, eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His body was sprawled out, with a particularly gruesome wound on his neck.
I killed someone.
She kept repeating the words, her voice breaking into a scream before she fainted. In her fading consciousness, she heard hurried footsteps and Daniel's anxious calls. Before she could see him, darkness consumed her.
Emily! Emily!
Daniel rushed up the stairs, barely catching his breath when he heard Emily's heart-wrenching scream.
Thank goodness, she's not hurt.
After confirming that Emily had no other injuries besides her hands, Daniel finally breathed a sigh of relief.
Look at what they've done to her.
His gaze turned icy as he looked at Henry's lifeless body, his eyes burning with rage.
Mr. Liu, the wound isn't deep. He's still breathing.
The bodyguard checked for a faint breath and calmly reported.
Take care of it. Get him to the hospital and make sure he survives.
He would not allow Emily to bear the burden of a crime. Those who harmed her would pay dearly. Perhaps due to the shock, Emily remained unconscious for an entire day and night. It wasn't until the sun set the next day that she slowly woke up. The unfamiliar, dim environment was bleak. Lying in bed, she opened her eyes, her mind filled with the image of her blood-stained hands. The door creaked open, letting in a gentle, warm light. Daniel stood in the doorway, his silhouette clear against the light. He walked to the bedside, his gaze soft.
She's safe.
Never had he realized how important Emily was to him until now.
Don't be afraid. It's all over. I'm here.
His soft reassurance seemed to have a magical effect, gradually soothing Emily's troubled emotions.
I don't need your help.
She turned her head away, stubbornly avoiding Daniel's affectionate gestures, but her flushed cheeks betrayed her feelings.
Are you mad at me?
Daniel chuckled, his fingers gently caressing her earlobe, hiding his regret and heartache behind his charming smile.
If it weren't for the company's meeting, I wouldn't have been late.
Thinking of the numerous missed calls from Emily on his phone, Daniel's heart ached.
Fortunately, everything's still in time.
Emily went upstairs with a heavy heart, trying to figure out how to avoid the wedding night. Suddenly, she paused, feeling a burning sensation in her chest, an unbearable heat building up.
Damn it! I've fallen into Michael's trap.
Suddenly, the driver and the lawyer in the front seat let out an awkward cough. Emily blushed and pushed Daniel away in a fluster, accidentally pressing hard on his injured shoulder. A muffled groan escaped his lips, and the next moment, Emily saw him bend over in pain, sweat beading on his forehead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Before she could finish, Daniel covered her mouth with his hand, straightening up with a forced calmness, looking seriously at Emily.
Don't say sorry to me.
Those 3 words felt too distant. Maybe it was the deep emotion in Daniel's eyes that made Emily lower her gaze, feeling inexplicably lost. Just as Daniel was about to say something, she changed the subject.
What's with the death certificate?
Daniel looked at her furrowed brows and smiled faintly, rubbing his thumb and forefinger together, making his meaning clear.
In this world, there's nothing money can't solve. If there is, it means there's not enough money.
Emily instantly understood, feeling a sense of desolation. Her chaotic thoughts were interrupted as the car stopped in front of Daniel's villa. Emily got out and followed Daniel inside, but suddenly froze as if remembering something.
What's wrong?
Daniel, with his sharp eyes, noticed her unusual behavior and pulled her back. Before he could ask, the driver behind them exclaimed.
Mr. Liu, what's that?
Following the driver's pointing finger, Daniel saw a white envelope under Emily's heel, exuding an eerie aura. Holding Emily with one arm, Daniel picked up the envelope, a sense of foreboding growing stronger. He exchanged a glance with Emily and slowly opened it. Inside were several gruesome and terrifying photos, captured clearly by infrared cameras. Emily's vision darkened, almost collapsing under the immense shock. No need to guess who sent the photos. Daniel struggled to control his turbulent emotions, flipping through the photos, about 4 or 5 in total, with a small note in between.
Mr. Liu, enjoying the taste of your sister-in-law?
The sarcastic note was clenched tightly in Daniel's hand, his eyes blazing with fury. Emily closed her eyes weakly, and when she opened them again, her expression was resolute.
Daniel, we should stop contacting each other.
Before she could finish, Daniel's fingers silenced her, and he gently kissed her on the head.
Some things shouldn't be said lightly. Just like when I said I'd help you, I meant it. For now, you should go to the Fang family. Michael won't dare do anything to you in front of Grace. I'll have James take care of you. Leave the outside matters to me.
Emily stared at him, overwhelmed with gratitude. Given the current situation, she had no choice but to follow Daniel's plan. That night, Emily, as usual, took care of Grace, making sure she took her medication before heading downstairs with a cup. Grace, at her age, fell asleep early but often woke in the middle of the night. Emily placed the washed cup in the sterilizer when she suddenly heard faint voices from the bathroom. She tiptoed closer, and Grace's anxious voice came through the glass door, the unclear words making Emily press her ear closer.
David, that caregiver, disappeared. The old woman's medicine was replaced by James. Have they found out something?
Emily's heart tightened. Grace was on the phone with Michael? The more she listened, the more terrified she became. Medicine? Besides Grace, who else in the house needed medication? Emily thought about the tense relationship between Michael's mother and grandmother. A terrifying suspicion formed in her mind. The person inside seemed to be ending a call. Emily quickly and quietly hid around the corner.
All right. I'll do as you say.
With a click, the bathroom door opened, and Laura cautiously stepped out. Emily didn't breathe a sigh of relief until she heard Laura's footsteps fade upstairs. Having stumbled upon such shocking news, Emily couldn't sleep a wink that night. In the morning, Emily had no mind to help the maid prepare Grace's nutritious breakfast. After much hesitation, she knocked on James' door.
Do you need something, sister-in-law?
James frowned, struggling to sit up in bed.
Does Grandma still have her old medication?
A single phone call wasn't enough to determine the truth. She needed concrete evidence.
Grandma's medicine is in the drawer by the living room cabinet.
As soon as he finished speaking, Emily rushed out. Before everyone else woke up, she informed the butler and left the house. Sitting in the taxi, she hesitated, staring at Daniel's name on her phone screen. After much deliberation, she put the phone away. When the taxi stopped, Emily got out, and before she could pay, the driver sped off. Emily was momentarily stunned but then turned to face the building with the sign Pharmacy Testing Center in red letters, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread.
Could you please test the ingredients in this medication?
She asked, handing the bottle from her pocket to the doctor at the registration window.
Fill out this form and pay over there.
The doctor said, taking the bottle and giving her a gentle reminder. By the time the test results were ready, it was around 5 in the evening. Emily, drowsy, sat in the waiting area, her eyelids heavy. She had been unusually sleepy lately.
Miss? Miss? The doctor wants to see you.
A young nurse pointed to an office door before walking away. Emily, fighting her drowsiness, entered the office.
Miss Emily, here is the test report for the medication you brought.
The doctor said, handing her a paper filled with complex terms that left her bewildered. Before she could ask, the doctor continued.
Is someone taking this medication?
Seeing the serious expression on the doctor's face, Emily instinctively shook her head.
Is there something wrong with it?
Despite her hopes, Emily feared the worst, knowing this was a matter of life and death.
Yes, there's a significant issue. Besides the usual health supplements, this medication contains trace amounts of arsenic sulfide, also known as arsenic.
As the doctor spoke, Emily's expression shattered. The fact that Michael and his mother were poisoning Grace was confirmed, a revelation that was nothing short of shocking.
What happens if taken long-term?
The doctor paused, still skeptical of Emily, but chose to continue.
If used for pest control, 1 dose is enough. For humans, it gradually destroys the respiratory and circulatory systems, eventually leading to death.
Emily's heart skipped a beat, a chilling sensation spreading from her feet to her head. Emily went upstairs with a heavy heart, trying to figure out how to avoid the wedding night. Suddenly, she paused, feeling a burning sensation in her chest, an unbearable heat building up.
Damn it! I've fallen into Michael's trap.
Thinking about this, Emily quickly hailed a taxi as she left the hospital. Just as she told the driver the address, her phone rang. It was Daniel, the person she had been thinking about all morning.
Are you free now? Come to Michael's house. Hurry!
When she returned to Michael's residence, it was getting late. The estate was brightly lit. Emily, clutching her wildly beating heart, slowly walked in. To her surprise, the entire Michael family was seated in the hall, even the rarely seen Michael was sitting on the sofa. As soon as she entered, all eyes turned to her.
What's going on?
Before she could finish, a dark figure rushed over and slapped her hard across the face.
You wretch! How could I marry such a vile woman?
Michael cursed, spitting out one insult after another. Emily's head buzzed from the blow, and she fell heavily to the ground with a dull thud. What shocked Emily even more was that the rest of the Michael family watched the violent scene coldly. Even James, sitting in his wheelchair next to Grace, held the old woman's shoulder tightly.
What is happening?
Emily couldn't understand what had gone wrong. A familiar piece of paper fluttered to her feet. Emily frowned, and her expression turned to horror when she saw the words on it.
You are truly malicious. You tried to harm Grandma.
The paper on the ground was identical to the drug test report in her pocket.
No. I didn't.
Emily loudly defended herself, pulling out the report from her pocket to show everyone.
I did go to test the medicine. Because I suspected someone had tampered with Grandma's medication.
She couldn't fathom why everything was happening so suddenly.
It was the previous caregiver. Not me. The tampered medicine was replaced after I arrived. It was you and your mother.
She pointed forward, trying to say that the whole thing was orchestrated by Michael and his mother. But a deep male voice interrupted her.
Enough. Grandma's medication was never changed. Emily, I never expected this from you.
James looked heartbroken, holding Grace's arm even tighter.
Grandma, it's all my fault. If I hadn't asked her to take care of you.
Emily's pupils dilated to the extreme. If not for the physical pain, she would have thought this was a nightmare. She had clearly asked James about the medication change that morning, and now he was denying it. Even if Emily had 1,000 mouths, she couldn't defend herself. Her throat felt dry, and a wave of despair rolled through her heart. Robert's face was terrifyingly dark. If not for a call from his old friend at the drug testing lab, this could have led to irreversible consequences. At this point, Emily finally understood the whole situation. It must have been a huge trap from the moment Laura made that phone call in the bathroom. How pathetic that she only realized it now. Overwhelming despair engulfed every corner of Emily's body. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Robert dial the police. Suddenly, a surge of strength came from nowhere. She stood up and ran outside like a madwoman. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. In the face of certain power, the lines between right and wrong often blurred. Emily couldn't afford to relax for a moment, but she didn't notice the car speeding towards her from the corner.
With a loud crash, excruciating pain shot through her abdomen, and she felt her body being lifted into the air.
Daniel was on his way to Michael's residence when an increasing sense of unease gripped him. Seeing the mansion in the distance, he sped up, fearing he might never see Emily again if he was too late.
Everything happened in a flash. Daniel watched in horror as a familiar figure was thrown several meters by the impact. His heart stopped.
Eily!
Stumbling out of his car, Daniel ran frantically towards Emily, who lay on the ground, covered in blood. His lips trembled, unable to form a complete word. The intense pain in her abdomen terrified Emily, even more than her concern for her own safety, as if something was slipping away from her body.
Emily! Emily, don't close your eyes. I'll get you to the hospital right away.
Daniel's voice sounded on the verge of tears. Seeing the blood spreading beneath Emily, his breathing became erratic. Daniel didn't know how many red lights he ran through. The blaring horns were incessant, but he seemed oblivious, focusing solely on the road ahead. By the time they reached the hospital, Emily's breathing was faint. Despite the pain, she couldn't fully lose consciousness, drifting in and out with barely audible moans, her face devoid of color.
Doctor! Doctor!
Daniel's desperate shouts echoed, his forehead, neck, and arms bulging with veins, his shirt soaked with blood and sweat.
Please, save her.
Tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. Emily's surgery lasted deep into the night. Daniel sat in the hospital corridor, his eyes empty and lifeless, oblivious to the curious glances around him. The second hand ticked away on the clock. Suddenly, the operating room door opened, and a sweat-drenched doctor emerged. Daniel rushed forward.
Doctor, how is she?
She's out of immediate danger, but the baby.
Hearing the word baby, Daniel froze. Emily was pregnant? That meant it was their child. Daniel stared at his hands, trembling uncontrollably, covered in filthy blood. He had inadvertently caused the loss of his own child. Overwhelmed by despair, Daniel felt crushed by the weight of guilt.
She's safe now. There will be other chances for children.
The doctor, accustomed to such accidents, patted Daniel's shoulder, hoping to encourage him, but received no response and had to leave. The glaring sunlight streamed through the window, casting a harsh light on Emily's face, offering no warmth. Her eyes wandered around the hospital room, the stark whiteness making her dizzy.
This is a hospital? So, I wasn't gone.
Emily went upstairs with a heavy heart, trying to figure out how to avoid the wedding night. Suddenly, she paused, feeling an unbearable heat in her chest. She realized she had fallen into Michael's trap.
Damn it!
Outside, soft voices could be heard, unfamiliar yet grounding. The door to the hospital room suddenly opened, and Daniel's face lit up with joy upon seeing her awake.
Emily!
He rushed over, cupping her face in his hands, his eyes moist with emotion.
Do you know? You've been unconscious for 2 days.
For the past 2 days, he had stayed by her bedside, not closing his eyes for countless hours. Emily blinked, recalling the humiliation she had suffered at Michael's house. But seeing Daniel, all her pent-up grievances came flooding out.
Do you believe me about Grace?
This was her most pressing concern. As long as someone believed her, she wouldn't feel so hopeless. Daniel's breath hitched, and he gently patted her back.
I'll get to the bottom of this. I won't let anything happen to you. Don't be afraid, I'm here.
Emily released her grip, her face pale. Did Daniel's words mean he doubted her too? Something seemed to shatter inside her. Daniel, preoccupied with his thoughts, didn't notice Emily's reaction. He turned to prepare the freshly bought porridge. A week passed, and Emily's health improved significantly. With Daniel's meticulous care, Michael and his associates couldn't get close. Having just finished a cigarette by the window, Daniel hesitated about whether to tell Emily about the loss she had suffered. Composing himself, he entered Emily's room with a gentle smile, only to freeze in his tracks. The room was empty. He called out, but there was no response.
A wave of fear washed over him as his eyes scanned the room, finally landing on a note on the bedside table. A sense of foreboding filled Daniel. He approached the note, feeling its weight despite its lightness.
I've left. Don't look for me. The 5 simple words plunged Daniel into despair. Clutching the note, he rushed out, hoping Emily hadn't gone far, searching the crowded hospital in vain. He went to Emily's family home but was stopped at the door. Daniel waited outside the villa for a day and a night without seeing Emily.
Don't wait anymore. Emily won't see you. She's already sent the divorce papers to Michael. She has nothing to do with your family anymore.
Laura, looking troubled, blocked the door, trying to persuade Daniel as the sky threatened a heavy storm.
Aunt Laura. I understand.
His response was flat, devoid of emotion, as he watched Laura shake her head and close the door. With a bang, the downpour began, drumming on the ground and the hearts of the sorrowful. Emily stood by the bedroom window, watching the car disappear into the rain, feeling something inside her extinguish. The dull ache in her chest told her she had unknowingly fallen in love with Daniel, the man who always said, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." She hadn't even left, yet she was already consumed by longing. Now, she had no strength, no right to stand by Daniel's side. One day, Daniel wouldn't be able to protect her, nor would he be obligated to shield her completely. She would rise from the ashes and return. That night, Emily bought a plane ticket to study abroad. In the bustling airport lounge, she sighed softly, pulling out her phone.
I'm leaving. Farewell.
Send. 5 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Emily had already informed the driver of the hotel's location as soon as she left the airport. Her mind had been in turmoil ever since she decided to return to this city.
Daniel, I'm back. How have you been?
With the driver's help, she managed to get her luggage into the room. By the time she finished, it was already late at night. The next morning, Emily drove around the city in her newly purchased car, unknowingly arriving at the address of the Su family villa from 5 years ago. The once exquisite and luxurious villa was now covered in dust, with only the withered roots of wild grass stubbornly clinging to the ground. In a daze, Emily seemed to see the torrential rain from 5 years ago that drenched everything, and the lonely figure standing in the rain.
Sigh.
Noticing the sky growing darker, she returned to her car and left. As she drove along the winding asphalt road, a black car passed by her. Emily didn't see the familiar face in the car window, the face that had haunted her dreams for 5 years. By the time she returned to the hotel, it was nearly 10 at night. As she waited for the elevator doors to open, a tall figure suddenly appeared in her view.
Daniel.
She called out softly, feeling as if her body was floating, her eyes welling up with tears.
Long time no see.
Yes, long time no see. I've missed you.
The elevator ascended, and as the hotel room door opened with a beep, the man's intense presence pressed down on her. Breaths and moans intertwined, their clothes falling to the floor from the doorway, their heated bodies moving towards the bed until they both collapsed onto the soft mattress. The next morning, the phone rang. A pale, delicate arm reached out from under the covers to grab the phone from the bedside table. It was a call from James. Emily exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding, but the shocking news from the other end left her stunned.
Quick! Call the police! My dad is missing!
Emily's face was filled with shock. Before she could ask for details, the call was abruptly ended. The seriousness of the situation told Emily she couldn't waste any more time. She rushed downstairs and bumped into Daniel.
What's going on?
Robert, he.
The words caught in her throat as she saw the TV screen, her trembling finger pointing at it. Daniel followed her gaze, his face instantly darkening. On the TV were none other than the two people Emily was desperately trying to find, Robert and Michael.
Damn it! Michael, you scoundrel!
Even Daniel's face turned grim. They had to get to the scene immediately. If Robert signed the papers, it would be too late. Meanwhile, Michael, who had everything planned out, was smiling arrogantly in front of the cameras. The noisy atmosphere created by the reporters below was almost lifting the ceiling.
Everything is going according to plan.
In stark contrast was the pale-faced Robert. The people below had no idea, but Robert could clearly feel the sharp knife pressed against his waist.
Dad, don't look so grim. Smile.
Robert knew that any sudden movement could lead to dire consequences.
Bastard! Through gritted teeth.
The next second, he felt the knife press deeper, making him freeze.
I said, smile.
Helpless, Robert forced a smile that was uglier than crying. On the other side, Emily and Daniel had run several red lights to reach the hotel just before the press conference started. They didn't even have time to park properly before rushing inside, only to be blocked by a group of burly bodyguards.
Get out of the way!
The sound of fists and feet clashing filled the air as the bodyguards mercilessly attacked Daniel and Emily.
Daniel!
Despite Daniel's skills, he was soon overwhelmed. A punch landed heavily on his shoulder, causing him to stagger back, his steps unsteady. The next moment, a barrage of punches and kicks rained down on them. Daniel shielded Emily with his body, silently enduring the immense pain until his consciousness began to fade.
Stop. Please stop.
Just as Emily was losing hope, the distant sound of police sirens filled the air. The panicked bodyguards had no time to escape and were quickly apprehended by the arriving officers.
I'm fine. We need to save Uncle Robert first.
All right, let's go.
Inside the hotel, Michael suppressed his impatience, watching as the media gathered. A smug smile played on his lips.
It's time to start.
Robert's body tensed as he shakily took the microphone. The noisy room fell silent as Robert cleared his throat into the mic.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, as the chairman of the Fang Group, I am here today to announce.
He paused, feeling a sharp pain in his back.
To announce that I will be transferring all control of the Fang Group to.
Before Michael could finish his name, the door to the venue was suddenly pushed open with a loud bang, interrupting Robert's speech. Everyone turned towards the door in confusion.
Panting heavily, tone, serious, sorry to interrupt, but I have something to say.
From the moment Emily appeared, Michael's expression began to crumble. He hid the knife in his hand and rushed towards the security guards at the door.
Tone, shouting, "Who let this lunatic in? Get her out."
But it was too late. Emily seized the moment and dashed towards the stage. Robert instinctively moved away from Michael.
Tone, shocked, what is she doing?
Tone, firm, Michael, I told you, you would regret this.
Emily pressed the switch on the large screen on stage. The screen flickered a few times before displaying Daniel's face. Despite the bruises and scars, his handsome features remained. Emily gestured towards the camera, and Daniel switched the display to his phone-connected computer.
Tone, serious, you've done terrible things, and now you're facing the consequences.
Simultaneously, all the evidence of Michael's crimes, including falsified accounts and surveillance footage of him causing Henry's demise in the hospital, were displayed on the screen one by one.
Tone, hysterical, no. This can't be happening.
Michael's face grew twisted and ugly. He cursed hysterically, looking as if he wanted to tear Emily apart, but was surrounded by a swarm of reporters.
Tone, relieved, it's over. Finally.
The police quickly intervened, quelling the commotion and escorting Michael to the police car. Even in his final moments, he turned to glare venomously at Emily.
The next day, James arrived.
Tone, crying, James, it was all Michael. He orchestrated the car accident years ago. I can't believe I trusted him.
Tone, comforting, it's not your fault, Robert. Let's set things right.
The guilt weighed heavily on Robert, and he immediately presented divorce papers, expelling Grace from the family.
Tone, serious, it's my fault. I should never have married that woman and fathered such a disgrace.
James comforted him with a smile. Michael's trial date was soon set, and no family visits were allowed during this period. Emily and her friends finally enjoyed a few days of peace, free from the lurking dangers. On the day of the trial, Emily arrived early, eager to see her enemy face justice. As the judge and the parties entered, the trial officially began. Michael, dressed in a yellow prison vest, shackled hand and foot, entered slowly from a side door. When he saw Emily in the audience, he suddenly erupted, screaming her name.
Tone, shouting, Emily. Emily.
The guard's electric baton crackled, and Michael fell to the ground, convulsing, his eyes still fixed on Emily with a venomous glare. Michael was dragged up and confined in a small pen before the court. The judge banged his gavel, and the trial commenced.
Tone, serious, order in the court.
To everyone's surprise, Michael confessed to all his crimes, including framing Emily for Henry's death.
Tone, defeated, I did it. I framed her. I caused his death.
Each heinous act he admitted to ensured he would never see the outside world again. When the judge announced the verdict, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The decision was a death penalty with a 3-month reprieve, deemed the fairest outcome for Michael. Just as Michael was about to be taken away, a heart-wrenching cry erupted from the gallery. A figure stumbled forward, hugging Michael from behind.
Don't take my son. Please.
The woman's desperate voice echoed through the courtroom, drawing sympathetic glances from those present.
Mom, lean in. I have something to tell you.
Laura, tears streaming down her face, obediently leaned in. The next moment, something unimaginable happened. A piercing scream filled the room as Michael bit down hard on his mother's ear, blood gushing out instantly. The guards rushed to pull them apart. As they did, Michael still had half an ear in his mouth, his blood-stained face twisted in madness.
It's all your fault, you worthless woman. You've ruined my life. No background, no status, nothing. You've dragged me down.
The onlookers were horrified by Michael's actions, shouting and condemning him. Emily felt a deep sorrow for Laura. Laura, sitting on the floor, stared blankly ahead, unable to believe the words coming from her son's mouth. Suddenly, she stood up and slammed her head against the wall. The white wall was stained with blood, and Laura collapsed, a gaping wound on her forehead showing just how hard she had hit. Her body twitched a few times before she passed away.
Don't be afraid. I'm here.
Emily thought, no matter how many lifetimes she lived, those words would always be the sweetest.
Daniel, you are the best gift heaven has given me.